Sophia wiped the fog from the garage window with the sleeve of her old denim jacket, watching as rain drizzled down over the rows of beat-up trucks parked outside. She'd been up since dawn, tightening bolts on an old Chevy that barely made it through the winter. At 22, she had grease in her hair more often than shampoo, but that didn't bother her. She loved every second she spent under a hood, wrench in hand, heart pounding with the thrill of bringing dead engines back to life. Her father had shown her how to fix an engine before she could ride a bike. She still remembered standing on a crate beside him while he taught her how to hold a ratchet, how to listen for the subtle grind of a worn piston, how to breathe life into cold metal. He'd passed away 2 years ago, leaving behind nothing but a rusted toolbox, a dusty garage, and a reputation Sophia was determined to protect. The small-town shop hadn't seen much glory since he died. The regulars came by for oil changes and tire patches, but the big jobs went to the city. Sophia didn't mind. She knew her time would come. When the low rumble of an unfamiliar engine pulled her from her thoughts, she turned just in time to see a black McLaren glide into the lot. Its sleek curves were out of place among the battered pickups and dented sedans she usually worked on. She wiped her hands on a rag and stepped outside, rain spattering her boots as the gull-wing door lifted with a soft hiss. Out stepped a man in an expensive charcoal suit, polished shoes splashing through a muddy puddle. He scanned the garage sign, then settled his sharp eyes on Sophia. Carter Hayes didn't look like the kind of man who got his hands dirty. He had that air of someone who didn't wait for anything. Sophia greeted him with a polite nod, waiting for the usual questions. Was her boss around? Could he speak to the owner? But Carter just pointed at the McLaren and said, "She won't run. Think you can handle it?" His tone made it clear he didn't believe she could. Sophia's lips curled into a small grin. She'd been underestimated her whole life, but she'd learned early that people's doubt was her best fuel. She popped the McLaren's hood and leaned in, the roar of the rain on metal mixing with the soft ticking of the cooling engine. It smelled expensive. Clean steel, premium oil, a whisper of burnt rubber from the last time its owner probably tried to race it down a highway. Sophia traced her fingers along the engine block, eyes flicking over the complex layout. She could almost hear her father's voice in her head, reminding her to feel the engine like a heartbeat, listen for what it was trying to say when no one else could. Carter leaned against the doorway of the garage, tapping something on his phone, barely looking up as Sophia asked him questions about the last time the car ran clean. His answers were curt, distracted. He probably thought she was wasting his time, poking around where she didn't belong. Sophia ignored his attitude. She grabbed her battered notebook from the workbench, pages filled with scribbled diagrams and oil-smudged notes. She flipped to a blank page and started sketching. Carter raised an eyebrow when he saw the mess of sketches, but said nothing. He just checked his watch again and sighed. By noon, the rain had turned to a heavy drizzle, dripping steadily off the corrugated roof as Sophia stripped off her jacket and tied her hair back. The smell of old coffee and machine oil filled the air. She tightened hoses, replaced cracked seals, and cleaned corroded plugs. Each piece came apart and back together under her careful fingers. Every tool in her father's old chest felt like an extension of her hands. Carter stepped out once to take a call, his voice clipped and cold, eyes flicking back to Sophia as if to remind her he didn't expect miracles. She knew he was probably some big city investor, someone who bought cars like toys and replaced them when they broke. He wouldn't understand what it meant to squeeze every mile out of a machine until there was nothing left but bolts and memory. That was fine. Sophia didn't need him to understand. She just needed to prove him wrong. By mid-afternoon, the McLaren's sleek engine bay looked like a surgical theater. Her knuckles were raw and smudged with black grease, but her eyes gleamed with the quiet fire her father once praised. Carter finally stepped closer when he heard the click of Sophia turning the ignition key for the first test. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. He shook his head, muttering something under his breath. Sophia ignored him. She adjusted the timing, tweaked the fuel rail, and tried again. This time the McLaren roared to life for a split second before stalling out again. Carter's smirk grew. Sophia's jaw tightened. She had seen this before. The moment people gave up on something just before it worked. She wasn't going to let a few stutters break her focus. As the sky turned a soft orange outside, Sophia pulled out her phone light and peered deeper into the guts of the engine, eyes tracing wires and lines like a surgeon tracing veins. She reached for a small wrench and loosened a bolt that shouldn't have been tight. A hidden flaw. One small mistake by someone else that had kept this million-dollar monster silent. She adjusted the line, tightened the new fitting, and slid back behind the wheel. Her fingers hovered over the ignition, grease under her nails, a heartbeat echoing in her throat. She turned the key. This time the engine didn't just start, it sang. A low, powerful growl filled the shop, vibrating through the concrete floor, rolling over the scattered wrenches and stained rags like thunder. Carter straightened up, mouth parting slightly as he heard the car settle into a deep, steady idle. Sophia stepped out, wiping her hands on her jeans. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The sound of the McLaren running perfectly spoke louder than anything she could have bragged about. Carter stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Sophia looked over at the photo of her father pinned to the tool cabinet, his grin forever frozen in time, hand resting on her tiny shoulder in a snapshot from when she was 10. She gave the photo a small nod. The McLaren's engine rumbled behind her, alive and ready for the road. Carter pulled his wallet from his coat pocket, flipping it open, but Sophia held up a hand. She didn't want his money, not yet anyway. She wanted his respect. She wanted the world to know her name, not just the dusty sign over her father's old garage. Carter walked around the McLaren, fingertips grazing the hood, listening to the steady heartbeat Sophia had revived. When he looked at her again, there was no smirk, no dismissive glance, only a flicker of something that almost looked like admiration. He slipped his wallet back into his pocket and offered her his hand instead. Sophia glanced at it, then at the car, then back at him. She took it, her grip firm, oil still on her palms, a silent promise that this was only the beginning of something bigger than a paycheck. The McLaren's lights cut through the dusk as Carter climbed in, the engine's purr sending a thrill down Sophia's spine. He rolled down the window, looked at her with a strange, calculating smile, and said, "I'll be back tomorrow. We need to talk." Then he pulled away, leaving wet tire tracks on the cracked pavement. Sophia stood in the doorway of the garage long after the taillights disappeared. The rain had stopped. The clouds drifted apart, letting the first stars peek through. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew it would roar to life. Sophia barely slept that night. The sound of the McLaren's engine still echoed in her mind as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment above the garage. She kept replaying Carter's final words in her head, wondering what he really wanted. She knew it couldn't be just another repair. People like him didn't come back for a simple tune-up. She turned on her side, the soft hum of rain against the window soothing her restless thoughts. She promised herself she wouldn't get her hopes up, but a small part of her couldn't help it. By sunrise, she was back in the garage, sweeping oil stains off the concrete floor and reorganizing the tools her father once guarded like gold. She checked every socket and ratchet twice, making sure they were clean and in their proper place. She even wiped down the old photo of her dad above the workbench, tracing his faded grin with her fingertip. Maybe he'd be proud today. Maybe he'd shake his head at her for daring to dream bigger than patching up farm trucks. Either way, Sophia knew she had to be ready for whatever Carter would throw at her next. By mid-morning, she heard the unmistakable purr of the McLaren outside. She wiped her hands on her rag and stepped out just in time to see Carter getting out of the car. This time, he wasn't alone. A man in a grey blazer stepped out from the passenger side carrying a leather portfolio. Sophia's stomach tightened. She hated suits. Suits meant paperwork, contracts, fine print that buried the dreams of people like her under signatures and red tape. Carter nodded at her, his eyes calm but sharp. The man beside him didn't smile. He just looked at her hands. Carter wasted no time with small talk. "You did something no one in my usual circle could do," he said, his voice steady, almost respectful. "I want to know how you learned to work like this." Sophia shrugged, glancing at the McLaren. "My dad taught me. He said if I could build it in my mind, I could build it with my hands." Carter's lips twitched at that, but he didn't laugh. The man beside him opened the portfolio, revealing sketches, designs, blueprints of something far more complex than a single sports car. Sophia's eyes widened despite herself. "These," Carter said, tapping the blueprints, "are prototypes. Custom engines for a new line I'm funding. I have the money. I have the factory. What I don't have is someone I trust to build what's on these pages into something that runs." Sophia barely heard the rain drumming on the roof. Her fingers hovered over the crisp pages, tracing lines and measurements that spoke to her in a language she knew by heart. She could almost feel the hum of pistons, the hiss of turbochargers. But fear crept up too. This was bigger than any old Chevy she'd ever rebuilt. Carter must have seen the hesitation on her face. He stepped closer, voice low but firm. "You're young. You don't have the pedigree, the fancy diploma, but you have something better, instinct. I watched you bring that McLaren back to life with nothing but your father's old tools. That's what I want." Sophia swallowed hard. She thought about the rent overdue, the cracked concrete floor beneath her boots, the way her father's hands used to tremble in his final days when he worried she'd give up on her dreams. She met Carter's eyes and nodded slowly. The man with the portfolio handed her a small stack of papers, an offer letter. Sophia skimmed the words, the legal jargon blurring together with the hum of her heartbeat in her ears. She felt Carter's eyes on her, waiting for her to back down, to say she needed more time. But she didn't ask for more time. She grabbed a pen from the cluttered workbench and signed her name at the bottom. Carter's nod was subtle but approving. The man in the blazer closed the portfolio without a word. Sophia exhaled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. By that afternoon, Sophia found herself standing inside a massive industrial garage on the edge of the city. Concrete floors stretched out under rows of shiny cars in various stages of assembly. Expensive tools she'd only seen in trade magazines lined the walls. A team of suited engineers watched her like she was an oddity. Some whispered, some smirked. Sophia felt the familiar burn of being underestimated settle into her chest. She ignored it. She had one goal: to prove every last one of them wrong. She slipped her jacket off, tied her hair back, and went to work. Her new workspace was bigger than her entire family's old shop back home. She took her time, moving her father's battered toolbox to the far corner where it felt like home. She ran her fingers over the new equipment, learning their weight, their hum. Some of the engineers tried to offer polite advice. Some tested her with complicated questions meant to trip her up. Sophia answered them all without blinking. By the end of the first week, a few of the snickers turned into quiet nods. She didn't mind. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to build engines. Late at night, when the rest of the team clocked out, Sophia stayed behind. She wiped sweat from her brow, sketching improvements on a clipboard, while the faint hum of industrial lights buzzed above her. She missed the smell of her father's old garage, the musty oil, the coffee gone cold on the workbench. But here she had new smells: fresh steel, clean oil, possibility. She pushed through fatigue, through the doubts that sometimes crept in when the engines wouldn't cooperate. She imagined her father's voice reminding her that a machine is only as stubborn as the hands that shape it. By the end of the month, Sophia's engine prototype roared to life on the test bench, the room filled with the deep, throaty rumble of power that made even the seasoned engineers step closer in disbelief. Carter walked in just as she shut it down, his expression impossible to read. He asked her one question: "Is it stable?" Sophia only smiled, wiped the grease from her face, and said, "Take it for a spin and see for yourself." Carter's grin was genuine this time. For the first time, Sophia felt like more than a mechanic. She felt like an equal. The following weeks turned into a blur of blueprints, test drives, adjustments, and late nights fueled by black coffee and stubborn determination. Sophia pushed her team as hard as she pushed herself, Mistakes were made, bolts she over-tightened, valves that refused to align, but every failure taught her more than success ever did. By the time Carter scheduled a private demonstration for investors, Sophia's engine was purring like a big cat ready to hunt. She stood by the prototype car as the investors arrived, adjusting her ponytail and ignoring the way some of them looked her up and down. Carter didn't introduce her as the mechanic. He called her our lead builder. The title landed like a spark in dry grass, setting off whispers she couldn't quite catch. She didn't care. When the investors heard the car fire up, saw it glide across the test track smoother than silk, their skepticism melted faster than a snowflake on an exhaust pipe. One by one, they leaned in to shake her hand, congratulating her like they'd always believed in her. But Sophia knew the truth. They'd believe only as long as the engine purred, so she made sure it roared. When the final handshake was done, and the last engine note faded into the dusk, Carter pulled Sophia aside near the open bay doors. The city skyline flickered beyond the chain-link fence, headlights weaving through the evening traffic. He didn't say much, just handed her a single key fob. "This one's yours," he said, nodding toward the first production car rolling off the line. Sophia stared at the gleaming vehicle, paint so fresh it still smelled like ambition and new beginnings. Her chest tightened. She thought about her father, about that old rusted Chevy back home. Sophia ran her hand along the hood, feeling the engine's faint warmth beneath her fingertips. This was hers, not given but earned with every late night, every skinned knuckle, every doubt she refused to accept. She slipped the key into her pocket, turned to Carter, and nodded once. She didn't need to thank him. He knew. She was no longer just the girl in greasy overalls, fixing rusted trucks on the edge of town. She was an engineer, a builder, someone whose name people would know when they talked about the machines that moved the world forward. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sophia stepped out into the night, her reflection flickering in the showroom glass beside the rows of cars that would carry her name. Engines built by hands that refused to quit, by a mind that dreamed bigger than any blueprint could hold. She slipped into the driver's seat of her first car and turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth and strong. As she pulled away from the factory lot, city lights ahead, she knew her father would have smiled that same tired, proud smile. And Sophia smiled too.